Back at it here on the Kaufman Corner podcast with you as always, the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli. I'm Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB as we talk some pitching with the Kansas City Royals. We talked to Brian Sweeney not long ago. Now we're going to go down on the farm. The guy who puts it all together before you ever see it, does a lot of the work behind the scenes, Paul Gibson. He is the Senior Director of Pitching Performance for the Royals. We'll talk about what some of the biggest differences are on how pitchers are developed today versus the past. What about innings totals? You know, Rany's always on that quest for why aren't we pitching him more innings? We'll get Paul's thoughts on that. Teaching velocity. What do you look for in a struggling pitcher? When is it time to move him to the bullpen? We'll hit some of the top names in the Royal system and where they sit, and maybe some of the projects or some of the salvage projects as you look to put together all the arms. We're talking all things pitching right here on the Kaufman Corner podcast.
This is the Kaufman Corner Podcast, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Royals, breaking down the Royals like no one else can. Kaufman Corner is hosted by Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro. Rany is a co-founder of Baseball Prospectus, author of Rany on the Royals, and former columnist for Grantland, The Ringer, and The Athletic. Soren is the award-winning afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Kaufman Corner is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here are your hosts, Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro.
All right, thank you very much, Curtis. We do appreciate it. And how about it, Rany? We're going to talk a little pitching here. Paul Gibson's going to join us just here in a minute. And, you think about, one of the things I also want to talk about, I didn't have this in the rundown, but just like trying to develop pitching with less teams. Now, a few years ago, like the whole job kind of changed. Now they've done it. There's been a lot of, a lot of things that they've had to evolve with just with the changing rules of it. But we know the lifeblood of any team is its pitching staff, the ability to develop pitching. And for a small market team, even more so, we saw how important pitching is with the Royals back in the playoffs last year. They did it off the strength of their pitching. And, big job for Paul Gibson to try to manage the entire pitchings, the farm system and all the pitching in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this team last year, we know that they had been making changes behind the scenes in terms of pitching development for a couple of years. And it did feel like last year was the year that everything blossomed and came together, not just in terms of the pitchers that they signed as free agents like Waka and Seth Lugo, but, the development of Alec Marsh and, Brady Singer coming back and having a really strong year and, some of the bullpen reinforcements late in the year. You can't win without good pitching. And especially if you're a market the size of Kansas City, you can't buy all of your pitching on the free agent market. You have to develop some of it internally. The Royals have been doing a better job of that in the last couple of years, and last year we saw the results of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Without further ado, let's welcome Paul Gibson to the Kaufman Corner podcast. Paul, how are you, sir? Thank you for the time.
I'm doing wonderful, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, and first of all, we mentioned this. We were talking to you a little bit before we got started here, but this is like the board is stacked behind you, right? As we can see behind you, all the names are up there. We've got a lot of notes up there. Is there anything we should be, zooming in on right there? You said no secrets. There are no secrets with the organization.
No, there are very few secrets in this game these days, and especially the way we go about our business here. We try to be as transparent as we can with everybody, interdepartmentally, and so on. So I'm glad to be here and talk pitching.
Yeah, I've talking with you last year at spring training, you're talking with everybody in the organization. That's one of the things I've always been impressed. There's an incredible honesty, like compared to football, where everything is this deep secret that's buried away and, some closet somewhere and nobody wants to discuss. Is that just a Royals thing or is that a baseball thing?
Well, I've been here. This is my 15th year here. And one of the things that this organization has stood for since the day I got here is how we treat people. We try to be consistent. We try to be open and honest with each other. Obviously, there are difficult days, there are difficult years, There are good years. 14 and 15 demonstrated that, and last year again. And it's an ever up and down kind of battle in this game. And the information that's out there, most clubs have a very similar group of information pockets, but it's how you use it and how you apply it that separates the good from the bad.
So, Paul, you've been, like you said, with the organization for about 15 years. I believe you've been in your current role for about 4 or 5 years. Your current title being Senior Director of Pitching Performance. Can you give us a little explanation as to what that job entails? And then also, I'm curious, with the Royals having made a pretty significant change in the pitching development area a couple of years ago when they brought in Brian Sweeney and some of the new guys, Zach Bove, people like that, like how your job has changed over the last couple of years.
It's a great question. I was in scouting. First of all, I've been in the game 47 years in one fashion or another, drafted out of high school. And after 10 years in the national cross-checking role in the scouting department, JJ and Dayton came to me at that time and asked me to step in and do sort of a dual role in the summer, going out and visiting with the pitchers and getting an opportunity to help evaluate where we're at in our system. And so I did that for about a year, and then we got together and we talked about developing a better, more comprehensive, because we could see the times changing with pitching development, player development as a whole, as a matter of fact, not just pitching, with all of the support departments around us. And so we were going to make an attempt to get ahead at that point. And I'll tell you a little backstory. When the job was outlined to me, the first response to my mind is, this is my sweet spot. This is going to be incredible. This will be easy for me, And I went to AA, and at that time, Alec Marsh was in AA, and he was struggling a little bit. And I left Northwest Arkansas, and I was driving back to Kansas City, and I realized very quickly that I needed to make some adaptations in how I was looking at pitching development. The way the pitchers were being spoken to in the offseason, the way that they were being spoken to by their college coaches when they were going back to them, we were not there. And I remember we did a pitching development meeting in Kansas City. I was listening to all of our people, our scouts, our front office, our general manager, our medical people. It was a lot to consume. And I realized at that point that we really needed to first of all, figure out a better way to communicate with pitchers, to communicate with these people, because they were so different than we had been exposed to when we were playing, certainly, but even as coaches. So and then COVID came and contraction of the clubs came. And so it started at a dimension of this that really was going to take a little bit more time. The last 2 years, once Matt Cotrero and Brian Sweeney came on board, there was a laser focus on communication. And that's not to say that we weren't communicating. It was the level that we were communicating on. And basically, Matt came in and knocked down all the walls in the building and asked for complete transparency amongst all the departments. So that really pushed us towards the goal that we were headed towards. And I'm really proud to say at this point, we have some really amazing people in this pitching department, and we really have some amazing people on the scouting side right now, and people that we talk to every day, and we help groom this so-called philosophy that we're working towards.
I'm curious, you mentioned Alec Marsh there. I mean, his story is kind of a unique one in the sense that he never really did, light it up in the minor leagues, right? But then he came up and was a huge part of your success this year. Like, for somebody who's just looking at numbers down in the minor leagues, you would, no fan would have been like, well, this guy's going to be a guy who's going to come in and give us high quality innings on a playoff caliber team. Like, what what do you look at and what do you see in the development that the numbers don't tell, right? Obviously velocity is one of them, or movement, but how do you take someone who maybe, how do you know when to push a guy when the numbers aren't there and you go ahead and elevate him and say, okay, he's ready for the next level, even though he's yet to really statistically, dominate the level he's in?
Yeah, good point. One thing that we definitely recognized early on, the two drafts that have been affected most by contraction and COVID were the 2018 and 19 drafts from our perspective, with the Singer, Lynch, Bubic, Kowar, et cetera, draft in 18, and then Marsh in 2019, amongst others, some of which are in other places now. But their development timeline, combined with factors internally, whether it be injury, whether it be role, I can't think of a group that was more affected by their development than those two draft classes for us. And certainly you can extend that to the draft of the COVID year where we only had 5 rounds. But I think the arrival time and the expectations, Brady was cut out of a little bit of a different cloth as it related to maturity and makeup, and he got to the big leagues rather quickly. Bubic, similar kind of guy, and Lynch, a little bit different in the development process because of where he was at when he came to us from the University of Virginia. So to your question directly, the stuff is really the least likely to be the biggest issue. It's the use of the stuff, the command of the stuff. And now, as we dig into these numbers and we get to the root of everything, it's what they do when they're on the mound. The first pitch strikes, the strikeout to walk ratio, all of the little things that, if you go back in time, it takes innings and takes appearances for the most part. Now, you look at Paul Skeens and you look at some of these outlying type guys, and if you use them as a comparison, it can be unfair. But for the most part, Alec Marsh, as a good example, needed a little bit of time. He was a tremendous draft for us with really good stuff, but needed a little bit more time to fine-tune the craft and be able to command the strike zone. If you look at the history of his outings in the minor leagues, you'll see that he would start slow sometimes. Other times you get third, fourth inning, and he'd have a hard time flipping the lineup over later. These are all things that are acquired skills that young pitchers develop. And unfortunately, the timeline is not the same for everybody. There was a period of time where we had all these young guys in the big leagues at the same time. Some of them ready for it, some of them not. But what they lacked at that moment when they were in the big leagues together early on was the leaderships of a Lugo and a Waka. And that, I think, in Alec Marsh's case, Brady's case, Bubic's case, Lynch's case, has been an incredible opportunity for them to learn from guys that have been around the block several times. So I think that played a big role in Marsh's development, certainly Lynch's development this year, and then Bubic coming back from Tommy John surgery, being able to step in and make a huge impact on the team down the stretch.
Now, you mentioned Daniel Lynch there, and I find his development interesting in the sense that, anytime a starting pitcher is struggling, as a fans, we say, would this pitcher succeed more if he were in the bullpen? If he got a chance to throw in short stints and just to air it out, he could be a lot better. And the kind of the classic example of a starting pitcher who moves to the bullpen and blossoms is a guy who probably throws really hard, but maybe doesn't have multiple pitches or doesn't have great command. And, he turns into, Rick Vaughn from Major League in the bullpen, right? He's wild and he just throws really hard. Daniel Lynch is, a lefty with 4 pitches, not overpowering stuff, does not fit that mold at all. And yet he went from being, a pitcher who had up and down as a starter in the major leagues and was in AAA at the time, moved to the bullpen when he got called to the majors. So really, like, he didn't have even a chance to adjust to throwing out of the bullpen in AAA, and came up late in the year and was nails. I mean, he didn't give up a run in September out of the bullpen. How do you know, like, or what gives you a sense of a pitcher that this is going to be a guy who could blossom in the bullpen, who might adjust well to that role, versus another starting pitcher who just doesn't have the ability to do that?
Yeah, there's some complexities to how that evolves. Number one is major league need. Last year there were discussions ongoing all year as Daniel was in Omaha and getting called up here and there to fill in some spots that were necessary during the major league season. So that's one most important, especially when the team is in the race. It's all hands on deck. No matter what your role is in AA or AAA, you are expected, or we are expected, to hand off somebody that can help us finish out games or bridge the gap or spot start, whatever it may be. So that's one side of it. The second side of it is, from a development standpoint, our scouts, our front office, our department, we ask each other frequently, how are we going to develop X player? I'll give you an example. Eric Sarantola, who just got put on the roster this year and will be in Major League Camp. So Eric was a pitcher at Mississippi State and a damn good arm. Had some struggles there. So some people that when we drafted him looked at him as a reliever early on. Others made chance starter and anything else you can think of. Everybody had an opinion. So as the AA season progressed last year, and we started to think about what might come up, what scenario might come up where Eric Sarantola can help our major league team. Well, it's in the bullpen. So we shifted him to the bullpen. And so you want to get them enough work. And certainly part of this conversation might evolve into, how do we get guys enough quality innings to develop while at the same time not be as concerned about what the role might be down the road. For example, Sarantola was starting and we were keeping him out there for 60 to 75 pitches. Now, if we put him in the bullpen and he pitches an inning and he throws 8 pitches and gets through it, and then 2 days later he pitches another inning or 2, which one is a better development process for him? To get him 3, 4, 5 innings back to back to back. So it can be tricky. And then you look at Daniel Lynch, who's been a starter since Little League, never pitched out of the bullpen really anywhere, goes straight to the big leagues and does what he did for us in September. Similarly with Chris Bubich. Not much relieving history there. Now, what we have to be cautious of moving forward is the workload. The major league workload is, you're expected to be prepared to pitch almost every single day. So we have to develop that as well. Back-to-back days, 3 out of 5 days. So if we determine, if Q and Sween and the front office determine that Daniel Lynch is going to be in the bullpen, this spring will be an opportunity for us towards the second half of spring to put him in positions where he's going to pitch out of the bullpen. Same thing with Bubich. And I'm not sure which way that will end up at this point with the acquisitions that we've made this past off season. I guess we'll see how that goes this spring.
Is it easier to convince a guy to make that move now than it was? Like, because relievers and bullpen has been, I think elevated in its status of, I think the numbers will, explain that, this is important, where before it's like, I'm a starter. Nobody wanted to hear that. Is it easier in this modern day to tell a kid, hey, we've got a spot for you, but it's in the bullpen?
Yeah, in most cases it's easier. The big leagues is such a great place to play. Obviously the perks and the money drive that. There are still a few guys that believe in the routine of a starter, and they believe that they were groomed that way. But when you're when you're on a championship caliber club, the sell is a hell of a lot easier to a young pitcher that you're going to help us get to where we want to be, and that's in the World Series.
So I have a question, a general question, but a specific player, which is, how do you teach velocity, right? Because it used to be thought you couldn't. The velocity was like sort of an innate, feature of every pitcher, and that some pitchers would develop it and some pitchers wouldn't. And you would take a guy out of the draft and they would say he'd had a projectable arm, meaning that the expectation was he would add velocity, but it was almost like a magical process that no one could harness. And now it seems like over the last 10, 15 years, there are programs in place, both in major league organizations, but also at some of the academies like Driveline, where, they actually can seem to add velocity. And the pitcher I'm thinking about specifically is Frank Mazzucato, because when he was drafted, he was considered really the ultimate projectable arm. He was very, he was young for his draft. He was very flexible, didn't throw that hard, but the expectation was certainly as a lefty, he would develop more velocity and that would, cause him to blossom in the future. And, it's been 3 years. The velocity has ticked up a little, but it doesn't seem like a lot. But I'm just curious from a general perspective, what can you do to help bring that along?
Yeah, it's this was going to go back to the development process and how much has changed. So I go back to the draft, and it used to be very, very common for us to project on velocity with particularly young high school pitchers. And with the advent of the drive lines and the Cressy Sports Performance and Tread and a lot of these places, a lot that we don't even know about, weight training became a big thing for high school guys, more so than it ever had been in sports, for as a matter of fact, not just baseball. So the physicality and strength of a player is being tapped into at a much earlier age than it used to be. Frank Mazzucato from the Northeast, I was a Northeast pitcher myself. I weighed 160 pounds when I got drafted. I was considered a projectable Northeast arm, didn't get a lot of work, short high school seasons, etc. Nowadays, these guys are pitching all over the country in these showcases and outings, and then along with that, they're being exposed to the weighted ball programs, etc. So when I took this position, one of the things that I needed to really wrap my head around and be able to present in good faith to the front office, to the players, to anybody, was to be able to round out a program that was going to involve velocity enhancement. And so 3 years ago, as I started to develop a staff, I started to bring in people from the outside that had opinions on it and had some success with it. And we started movement prep programs. We started the use of what we call plyo baseballs. We're not still going to be big advocates of the running guns with the heavy baseballs, but what we did do was start to develop throwing programs geared towards a velocity enhancement, and we've seen a tremendous amount of improvement in velocities over the big picture. There are still guys like Frank Mazzucato, et cetera, that are still trying to find their way in body strength and movement patterns, et cetera. But there's enough there for us to say there is something to this. It is doable. I also do believe there is some risk involved with it if you let it get to the point where it becomes obsessive in nature. And now the risk of injury might increase a little bit. But the risk reward that we see is definitely something that we needed to be really good at.
We're talking to Paul Gibson here, Senior Director of Pitching Performance for the Kansas City Royals. We're going to take a quick break here, and we'll come back and we'll get into working with some of those outside throwing, drive lines, the different ones that are out there. We'll talk about that next year with Paul Gibson. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the greater Kansas City area. Nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor. Locally owned and making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Let Gann educate you about the most cost-effective way to solve your parking lot problems. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warning. Gann Asphalt keeps your parking lot safer and helps you and your business avoid unnecessary delays and costly expenses. Find Gann online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Paul, you mentioned some of the outside, and it seems like every agency now also has their own, kind of, workout facility, if nothing else. How much has that been a shift? Like, right? Because I know when you pitched, you worked out with the club and that was it. And I even remember, roughly 20 years ago or so that, guys started going to those and clubs didn't really like it. They wanted guys doing their throwing programs. Now it doesn't seem like there's a choice, right? There's guys are going to go to different places. How much is it that those, outside academies, for lack of a better term, have gotten better? And, how hard is it when you got a guy and you're like, hey, we need you to do this, and he's being told something else by some, by some outside company?
Yeah. Excuse me. There's two sides of this. Most certainly, it is imperative for us to maintain a partnership and communication channels with these people at Cressy and Tread and Driveline, et cetera. For two reasons. One, understand the mindset of what they're seeing when they evaluate. They all do their evaluations. And in some cases, their evaluations are a little bit different than what ours might be. We still maintain that our evaluation process over a period of 6-7 months every year when we have them is more important than what they might see in a 30-minute eval that they do before they write a throwing program. Now, having said that, having the player in the offseason during these periods of time where they're away from us, which I think is very important for every player to get away from the grind of the Kansas City Royals way all the time, because it gives them a chance to breathe. It gives them a chance to set their own off-season schedule, so to speak, so they can do things more liberally than they might under the structure of when we have 100 pitchers on campus or when we have the season going on. Now, we do disagree at times, and the better the relationship, whether it be with the agency or whether it be with the outside facility, the better we become at problem solving. So we communicate all off season with the players and the agencies and the facilities to help grow these guys.
And I know talent trumps all, right? I remember Dayton saying that when you talk, there are other factors. First and foremost is talent. So I know this wouldn't supersede it, but does it affect the players that the organization takes, who you're going to be working with? Well, he works with this group. We work better with this group. So all things being equal, we're going to take the player that works with this, group, or is that an agency that we think has a similar philosophy to us? Is that a tiebreaker?
I think probably at times there's opportunities that present themselves in the draft that will allow you to get a player that you might not have an opportunity to get because of things that surround the process. Most often, though, you're going to take the player that you believe is going to be the best player that you can get and work out the details as time goes on. There's so much that goes into that draft process, and the draft has changed so dramatically from 40 rounds to 20 rounds, and the pressure to get players to the big leagues more quickly, more efficiently. There are so many more driving factors than some clubs that wouldn't touch a high school player because he's so far away, and it flies in the face of their internal philosophy. So I think it can go both ways, but most often in my experiences, we take the players that have the best abilities and best makeup.
See, I mean, you bring up an interesting point about the decision to take college versus high school pitchers. and how the industry has changed in that regard. What I find interesting is, you go back to that 2018 draft, and the Royals were just laser focused on college pitcher after college pitcher. But in the last couple of years, it definitely feels like the organization has been willing to throw darts at the high school pitching rank, betting on upside, perhaps even with more risk. Obviously, we mentioned Mazzucato, Ben Kuderna, was a second round pick and got first round money in the draft. And then last year, David Shields, which is a guy we haven't seen yet, but I know there's some quiet excitement about what he could bring to the mound this year. So I'm curious if you can give us a little scouting report on David Shields. I think that's a guy a lot of our listeners, I've heard the name but don't know much about. But also, has there been a philosophical change in the organization about trying to gamble a little bit more on the 18-year-old pitching set as opposed to the 21-year-olds who might have a higher floor but also a lower ceiling?
Yeah, if I could go back to 2018, I was in that draft. It was one of my last drafts before I moved to this role. And we didn't go into that draft. We knew it was a strong college pitching group. And we knew we liked every guy that we took. But there were a lot of conversations during that draft that there were some interchangeable high school guys in there. And the way that draft fell, it ended up being college pitching very heavy. So that philosophy really wasn't in that room going into the draft because there were some high school guys that were interesting to us at that point. I'll get to Shields in a second. One of the things that you look at in terms of health and where pitchers come from, obviously Vanderbilt has produced quite a few big league pitchers very quickly to the big leagues afterwards. So some of those guys you might look a little differently than some of the mid majors or even some of the better schools. But I think, again, that draft, you go into that draft room and you line them up and things fall one way or another. And, this past year, David Shields, to get to your last point question, incredible athlete, dual sport player, football, physical, brash, confident, stuff. He's done nothing but impress us with work ethic and just his responsiveness to the things that we put in front of him. A different level of maturity. His father's a golf pro, and you can tell he's been exposed to a really strong work environment on what it takes to be a professional athlete. So, last year, and again, the draft is late now, so you'd like to see these guys pitch a little bit more so you can build innings going into the following year, which we don't have that opportunity anymore. The rookie league season ends just about the time they're getting there. The A-ball season ends 2 weeks later. So it's really hard to get them any workload after they've been off for a couple of months, with the high school season ending in May or June. So he's going to be here this week. As a matter of fact, he just got on the ground this morning, I think, and he'll throw a couple sides for us, and we'll start our build-up, and hopefully we're going to get to see him in Columbia at some point early this season.
Okay. You mentioned Ben Kuderna. That's a local kid. Where does he sit right now?
So Ben, and very similar to David Shields in responsiveness to challenges that we put in front of him. Ben had a pretty good year last year, but at the same time, we've identified some things, both in his pitch arsenal and some of the consistency in his stuff that we went after really hard this offseason. Body composition, ability to move down the mound in a better fashion so we can get more consistency. The early returns on that have been extraordinary. He was at Cressy this winter, and we've tapped into seeing him over there, and the returns have been really good. Ben is a very inquisitive guy, really driven to pitch in the big leagues. He's an invite to Major League camp. We want him to be around Waka. We want him to be around Lugo to learn some of the complexities of handling a routine and sticking to it.
So one of the changes we've seen in the sport over the last 10, 15 years is that even the best pitchers in baseball tend to throw fewer innings than they used to, right? Like the trend is more strikeouts, more velocity, but fewer innings thrown. And this past year, only 4 pitchers in the entire major leagues threw 200 innings. One of them was Seth Lugo, who was finished at 207. And Cole Reagans was up there as well, even though, he obviously has the history of Tommy John, et cetera. But like you look at the minor leagues and Ben Kuderna threw 115 innings in the minor league season. Noah Cameron, who I think may have led the Royals minor leaguers in that department, was at 129. And I'm just curious, like, how do you balance the need, obviously the overwhelming need to keep guys healthy with the need for them to develop, and especially in the minor leagues? Do you worry that if they're throwing 100, they're maxing out 120, 130 innings in a minor league season, that it will take them so long to ramp up to being able to throw 180 or 200 in the major league level, that you're losing value? Do you feel like the pendulum has swung too far towards limiting pitchers' innings, or do you feel like, or the Royals specifically with what we saw with Lugo and Reagans, Lugo being a converted reliever and he was full bore? Do the Royals have more of a philosophy that it is safe to let these guys throw more innings, give you more value, and you can still keep them healthy?
Excellent question. I'll go back to COVID when they lost a whole year, and then contraction, and then the minor league season having every Monday off. We used to go weeks without a day off. And this is an internal struggle that I have on an everyday basis. And I think there are people that, and I told you about transparency. JJ and I debate this. My pitching coaches and I debate this. You can stand on one side of this conversation or the other on any given day. And I think that after watching how we performed last year at the major league level, I think we need to, and we will make a bigger effort to get more pitchers. And I think last year we had more than we did the year before. Sometimes a couple minor, Luinder Avila had a minor thing last year. You might have seen more innings out of him. Cameron missed a week or 10 days at one point. Nothing serious, but enough to take 2 starts away, right? So we're going to make a bigger, better effort to build a foundation to getting our starters in that 130 to 150 range by the time they're in AA and AAA. Now, there is some consequences to that because with 2 fewer clubs, our pitching, we'll have. Last year, we would have 60 to 64 active pitchers in the minor leagues on any given day. That's a 15 to 16 man staff. We like a lot of the guys. Look, we took 14 pitchers last year alone, right? We have to find out if there's something there with the 14 pitchers we took last year. Not to mention that 2 or 3 of them got a lot of money, so we're definitely interested in making sure they get their work. The point is, on the opposite end of the spectrum, somebody's going to suffer. So if we go down to 14 or 13 even men staffs, that will eliminate some jobs and opportunities. And then, the guys at the end of the game in the minor leagues, that 6th inning, 7th inning, instead of getting 2 innings, it might be 3 guys getting 1 inning at the end of the game. So there is some give and take here, and then you add in rainouts in the off days I already spoken about. It's an everyday thing. We actually go through the games with the pitching coaches. Our coordinators are in contact. Noah Cameron gets to the 6th inning and he's got 78 pitches. He's going back out for the 7th inning. the coach will check in. A guy's at 90 pitches, and the pitches were evened out over the course of 6 innings, 15, 13, 17 an inning. We're going to let him go back out because he hasn't been tested with 30 pitches in an inning or 35 pitches in an inning. So this is going on every night at some affiliate or another or multiple at the same time. And I think we've agreed that we want to see that get to another level. How we get there, who it affects, how it affects them is something that remains to be seen.
Paul, you've mentioned a couple of times contraction, and for those that don't know, they took away a couple of the minor league clubs. There used to be more clubs, which meant you could be controlling more young players. And from the people I've talked to, that may be hurting the Latin American player more than anyone because they are signed at a younger age and need more places to play before they're ready for some of the higher levels of the minor leagues. Do you think that that is the case, that it's become more difficult to develop, certainly on your end, the pitching out of Latin America because those teams aren't there? The kids are so young. And is there a solution? Does it get us to a world draft? Do we put a team back in? I mean, what do you think of the developing the Latin American players with less teams now?
Well, it wasn't too long ago. We had 2 teams in the Dominican, 2 teams in Arizona. Contraction obviously created a deeper bottleneck at the Colombia level. You have 4 teams worth of pitchers going down to 1 at some point because we didn't have those half-season leagues that were so important to development of a high school guy or a young Latin pitcher. When I took this position, one of the things that we locked in on, we have an incredible individual running the academy in Victor Baez, who came to us through the Dodgers organization, and a lot of the principles that he brought with him from the Dodgers, who obviously have a reputation of great history in developing. And because of the way the system was, his skills weren't being necessarily used enough to help integrate the Latin player into our system. So one of the things that I wanted to do along with Victor was to get the players better health, better nutrition, better strength before they leave the Dominican. So they're better equipped when they get to the States to compete within less than 2 years to go to an affiliate. If you use last year as an example, we drafted 14 pitchers in the Rule 4 amateur draft. They've got to go somewhere. So you add another 10 to 14 young Latin pitchers that have been in Arizona since last April, the numbers don't add up very well. We made a strong effort last year to get 6 or 8 of our young Latin pitchers out of Arizona before the draft so that we could evaluate and give them a chance to spread their wings and compete under the lights, right? And I got to tell you, 7 out of the 8 handled it extremely well. There was increases in velocity. There was increases in quality of breaking balls. The Columbia pitching staff as a whole was one of the best strike. It had the best walk rate in the lower minor leagues at the end of the year at a little over 8%, which is unheard of at the A-ball level. And so that gives me hope that if we can get that young Latin pitcher out of Arizona before that draft, but if they don't get out of Arizona and you bring in another draft,
right,
it gets piled up so quickly that there's nowhere to turn.
Right. Well, on that subject, I mean, yeah, I always feel like, it's easy for a Latin American prospect to sort of be lost in terms of just publicity because these guys are signed when they're 16, 17 years old. And, if, a lot of them are getting very small bonuses, so they're not going to be on anyone's radar. Royals fans might have heard of like Yandel Ricardo, who got like a 7-figure bonus out of Latin America. But, when Salvador Perez signed, he got, a 5-figure bonus and quietly moved up through the minor leagues to the point where going into the 2011 season, I believe Baseball America ranked him as like the number 18 prospect in the system And by August, he was the starting catcher for the Kansas City Royals and on his way to, potentially a Hall of Fame career. I just find it fascinating that these guys sometimes can really be off the radar until suddenly they, emerge on the scene. So I'm curious, is there a name you can give us for like a Latin American pitcher specifically that maybe Royals fans, even the most hardcore fans, haven't heard of, but like you feel like might be someone who's going to surprise this year, who might pop up, maybe somebody from the complex level, or even who was pitching in the Dominican last year, but is a name that we should know about?
There's several of them. I'm so excited about this young Latin class. The first one is a young Cuban pitcher by the name of Felix Arande. Okay, Arande had a really good year in Colombia. We're talking 93-5 with tremendous feel, split finger, slider. Arande is one of our top prospects that a lot of people don't know about. Likely to start in Quad Cities this year. A really, really solid young pitcher. We have another one that came on the scene last year. He was in Arizona by the name of Yeri Perez. We have a young kid by the name of Marte who finished the season in Colombia. We got him a start or two. He had an injury to his shin, and it slowed down his development last year a little bit. We had hoped to have him in Colombia by midseason, but he didn't get there until the end. I think he pitched in 2 games. 6'5", up to 98. Might be a closer someday. These 3 guys stand out to me just off the top of my head. And then, obviously, Luinder Avila, who pitched in the Fall League last year, got put on the 40-man roster. He's probably the guy that's the closest. And one thing that I learned about the Latin, and I have Rene Francisco and I have Chino Cadejia and others in this organization that explain daily to me the mentality of where these kids come from. And what we don't, as I noted before, nutritionally they're challenged, educationally super challenged, and so we have a tendency to try to help them through by having interpreters around all the time. And they're like, now force them, get them to raise the bar, to learn the English language, to learn how to operate in the States, both as a person and a player. And there's a lot to it. Like when they have to fend a little more for themselves, as opposed to us trying to help them through every situation that needs to be managed, whether it's on the field or off the field. I think we're starting to see a lot of growth in that department as well. These guys are accountable. They know what's expected of them. And again, we're feeding them. We're doing a lot more things in the Dominican Republic Academy. Thankful to the resources from ownership and the front office giving us those opportunities to do that. So exciting times there.
I guess I'll leave you. My last thought is I asked you last year, and I'll ask you again. Obviously, he had Tommy John surgery, but Asa Lacy is a name that we will get in our chat room that pops up when people ask all the time, and he is kind of an out of sight, out of mind now. Although, again, we get people asking us all the time, where does it sit with Asa Lacy right now?
Yeah, I knew this was coming. Sorry.
Yeah.
I want to be completely honest and upfront. Asa has been beaten up in a lot of different ways, both by himself, by the high level of what he was expected of him coming in, and it's not been really easy for him. He's had a whole host of challenges with injuries. I'm not going to make any excuses for what we did when we picked him, because the level of the profile of who he was pointed towards him being a very quick riser in the game. And the game treats people a little bit differently, and it's how they pick themselves up from when everything is down. And truly everything in this young man's life has been a challenge since almost the very beginning. Back injury, and now Tommy John. And I talked to him the other day. He threw a side, and it was really good. And I said, God puts these things in front of you at times. This was an opportunity, as hard as this is to say to somebody that an injury like a Tommy John surgery is an opportunity, puts things in front of you with that. This is a hard reset that he's gone through. And he came in, he's worked extremely hard with our behavioral department. The woman that works with our behavioral science people down here, Kelsey, has done an incredible job with him, helping him understand what he's been through and how we can climb over it. So I'll say the same thing I said to you last year and probably the year before. We still consider Asa our own. We keep putting everything we can into getting him to where what he expects himself to be. He's got a high level of expectation of himself, and we're going to continue that process.
Paul, you've been incredibly generous with your time. We really appreciate it. I know you've got some meetings you got to get to, so thank you so much for making us a little bit smarter about the organization. Enjoy that warm weather in Arizona, and like you said, the storm is coming with everybody showing up before we know what it would be just a little over a week and a half away, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So they're already trickling in. Paul, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you on down the line.
I'll say this on the way out the door.
Yeah.
I appreciate the opportunity. I think it's really important, again, like we do with facilities and all the outside people, that we have an opportunity to give you guys information. Too much, a lot of times, gets led to speculation. Too many secrets lead to speculation, right? And I think that obviously there are things that we share. There are some things that we prefer not to share on certain times, or we can't. But I'd be glad to help you guys get better insight to what we're doing and what we're trying to do. I think it's good for the players. I think it's great for the organization, and I know it's good for the coaches here. So,
well, we appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate it. We love it. Paul, again, thank you for the time, and thank you for that as well. And enjoy spring training. It's going to be upon you soon.
Thank you. Hope to see you guys. We'll see.
All right.
Thanks.
There he goes, Paul Gibson, Senior Director of pitching for the Kansas City Royals. And I always enjoy my conversation with him. A thoughtful guy, been around, a big league pitcher himself, and is, very transparent. I mean, like, he'll tell you about everything. We want to tell you that we're always brought to you by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the greater Kansas City area. Nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor. Locally owned and making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Let Gann educate you about the most cost-effective way to solve your parking lot problems. With free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Gann Asphalt keeps your parking lot safer and helps you and your business avoid unnecessary delays and costly expenses. Find Gann online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Randy, before we get out of here, we do need to talk about a signing. Carlos Estevez is now a Kansas City Royal. Just your overall thoughts on that?
Yeah. It's going to be tough to cover that in the 5 minutes left to us. But as always, my thoughts are nuanced. I like the signing. I think he's a good pitcher. I like the fact that the Royals were willing to add $11 million to the upcoming year's payroll. I would have, given that money was available, I still wonder if they should have been more aggressive about using that money on a corner outfielder instead. But we actually just recently learned, Ken Rosenthal wrote about in The Athletic, that the Royals were actually quite aggressive in trying to sign Anthony Santander. And ultimately, Blue Jays offered him a 5-year deal, and I'm okay with not signing him to a 5-year deal.
Yeah, I think the Royals were in the mix at about 3 years.
Right. 3 and 66, which is a pretty aggressive itself. I'm not even sure I'd want him at that. Santander, I just feel like he was not a good fit for the ballpark. Profar obviously, is the guy I wanted, and believe they offered 2 years to Profar. Like, at least they were in on these guys. And when the bidding got too thick, it wasn't like, well, we're just gonna not spend our money. They found another route for it. And what I do like about the signing, so Estevez, he's a good reliever. He's not a great reliever. However, his command ticked up dramatically this past year. Like, he was a guy who, was typically a guy who walked, around 3 batters per 9 innings, a walk rate around 8-9% prior to 2024. Last year, you take out the intentional walks, he walked 8 batters in 55 innings. He had a walk rate of 4%. And I've said this before, but one of the best indicators I see for a pitcher taking a step forward is their walk numbers. If their walk rate drops like that, that's usually a long-term, something they can keep for the long term. It's not usually a fluke. And so even though he's 32, for a reliever with his stuff, upper 90s, 97 mile an hour fastball, and a sudden command upgrade, I actually think he could be maybe not a closer, but like a really, really good setup man. The other thing I like about him is that, he spent so much of his career in Colorado, right? So and everyone knows, Colorado, of course, but it's easy to forget when you look at his numbers, and they're, kind of mediocre when you look at his career numbers. I think a 4.24 career ERA or whatever. His ERA in Colorado, right, at Coors Field, is 5.57. You do the math. His road ERA for his career, let me get the exact number for you, is 3.06. Now, the road, he's pitched the last year and a half with the Phillies and the Angels, but most of his home stats are with the Rockies. So he's actually, if you just look at what he's done away from Colorado, he's actually a really, really good reliever. So I think he's going to help the team. And if their philosophy is we can't add to the offense, let's just build a shutdown bullpen, it's better than sitting on your money and not doing anything.
57 saves over the last 2 years. I'm with you. He's not your prototype for what you'd want for a closer. He's not Wade Davis dominating for the back, but if you put him into the 9th inning, he's not going to wilt either. Right? He's been there and done that and saved games. So it gives them great diversity at the back of that bullpen. So right. I'm with you. They didn't just sit on their cash. They had a plan B, and it was to go solidify the bullpen. And I think that's a good thing.
I do. And I think, well, the other thing is I really think this can help. The side benefit of this is it makes it that much easier to move Chris Bubic to the rotation. Like, this frees up the team from the worry of, well, we really think Bubic or whoever, Daniel Lynch, Alec Marsh, whatever, we want those guys in the rotation, but we can't afford to pull them out of the bullpen. Like, I see this being a way to open up a rotation spot. This may help the rotation as much as the bullpen if it means that they can be committed to moving whoever they feel is best in that role, without worrying that they're leaving a hole behind in the bullpen. So I actually think there's a double benefit here.
Yeah, I agree. And it gives them the flexibility to use Lucas Ursag, if they want to make him a fireman and close with Estevez, they've got options. And I think that's one of the things you like. The bullpen, started rough last year. How many games did they donate because of the bullpen issues? And then came on strong late. Now, if you start strong with the bullpen, how much better does that make this team? So,
right. And it takes a little pressure off Hunter Harvey too, in case he's not 100%. Like, if he is great, but like, so there's upside here, because if you have Urseg, Estevez, and a healthy Hunter Harvey at the back of the bullpen, and you can use guys like Lynch and Sam Long and Carlos Hernandez and Schreiber, all those guys are, they're pitching in the 5th, 6th, and 7th innings instead. That's actually a really good bullpen to go with, a rotation that we still think is going to be well above average. So the pitching staff looks like playoff caliber again. And that's no small task, right? Like, well, yeah, the offense is another story, but you're starting with one side of the equation at playoff caliber. That takes a lot of pressure off the team.
Yeah, it's a pretty good place to start. We'll talk more about Estevez on later Kaufman Corner podcast. We're always brought to you by our friends at GAN Asphalt and Concrete, with free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Why would you go anywhere else? GAN Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lots. Find them online at GANasphalt.com. For the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli, I'm Soren Petro, saying thank you very much for joining us here on the Kaufman Corner.